I think our community is very sick right now and probably feeling like very neglected. I see a lot of pain in people all the time, and I see them trying to treat their pain.
The amount of pushback that you have to face when you're trying to get people help and trying to get people supports is sickening and it's exhausting. The world we live in is getting scarier, and the services that we provide for people aren't growing with that. You know, the problem's getting bigger, but the supports aren't.
I think the people that I work with every day are struggling to feel like they have value and that they're seen by health providers, government, and just generally feeling like they've been cast aside by the people that are supposed to be helping them. They grasp for our attention. Everything is urgent because I think like the people I work with are so used to not having any of their needs met. Everything feels like an emergency, and people are in survival mode all of the time and struggle to have anything accessible to them. I think everyone here is also traumatized on like a continuous basis by losing their peers and their friends and their street family all the time, because people are like passing away at a very like alarming rate from drug poisonings and other health issues related to like homelessness as well.
We're seeing high-risk substance use in a lot of younger people now. You know, there are youth as young as 13 sleeping behind the hub, which is something that I never saw before. You know, even working in the shelter setting, until this year, I never saw that. I never saw youth that young being that at risk for overdose, that at risk for violence and trauma.
One of the biggest things that I notice that affects people that are street involved is that they are at risk of like injury and illness and violence more than anyone I've ever like met in my life, right? Like in a regular day where someone is trying to meet appointments, whether it's like getting methadone or they're supposed to meet with a doctor or they're supposed to attend probation, it's like you can wake up and be like assaulted or experience violence or have things stolen from you, have your medication stolen from you. And especially for people that live rough, like their predisposition to like health issues is like astonishing to me. They have like frostbite and like bug bites that get infected and MRSA and other staph infections and respiratory issues and burns and just like general injuries that you'd get like if you were camping all the time. Their bodies are going through a lot and not able to heal or like process any of the things going on with them. You know, I get sick and I take a day off work and I'm not expected to do anything. And they're dealing with so much more than that, and how can they be expected to complete any of the tasks that society and the community says like you're supposed to be doing these things, like if you want to get back on track you're supposed to do these things, and how can they?
I've almost gotten to like this gross stage of acceptance that this is the world that we live in, and I despise that. But it's something that I don't talk about a lot and think about a lot is the fact that it's not my fault that I can't provide these services. It's the fact that the world that we live in looks the way that it does and works the way that it does. People can't access healthcare because of the amount of stigma that they face every time they enter the hospital. Like I knew somebody who broke their finger, and instead of going and having it properly set, they were so scared to go to the hospital that they just let it heal the way that it was. And it's fucked up that people would rather suffer than access these services that we have in the community because they're not made to be available for all people.
I think of a man that I've worked with for a long time who has always lived rough, and he takes very good care of himself. He's got a dog, maintains a really great site, and is very self-sufficient. And also just generally keeps to himself. He doesn't really bother anyone. And there was a night, I think last winter, where somebody in the community, not someone who was experiencing homelessness, who we were familiar with, was walking his dog in the woods, and this man's dog started barking, normal things that dogs do. And the man, for whatever reason, pulled out a knife and slashed him across the face. He had a cut across his whole face like this that was gushing blood. And when he went to the hospital, they told him that he didn't need pain meds or that he was drug seeking. And this is not a man who uses opiates at all. He uses crystal sometimes, but he's not looking for pain. He's not seeking pain meds. He's looking for very reasonable pain management, considering the fact that he needed to have 30 plus stitches put across his face. And this was in the winter, and he went there in an ambulance, so he wasn't wearing a coat, and they released him the same night, and he didn't have a coat, and they didn't give him even a way back to where he was staying. So he walked back from the hospital with all these stitches in his face in the winter. And that's I hear it's a very normal experience. And when I've had the opportunity to sit with people in appointments or go to the hospital with them, I sometimes feel like I'm the only buffer between healthcare providers and these people being treated like absolute shit, and being told that they're not deserving of very reasonable things.
The amount of stigma that exists in our community, in the larger system, it's just such a huge barrier for everybody who needs these things. Yeah, there's no options for anybody. Social services doesn't give enough money to even rent a room. At this point, even for just a room rental, you're looking at least $700, and that is the absolute minimum. And if you are getting the full amount from Ontario Works, you're getting $721 a month. That gives you $21 after you've paid your rent to buy food, to clothe yourself, to shower and maintain your personal hygiene. It's obviously not anywhere near enough. So what are people expected to do? They don't have the option to even rent a room in somebody's home. And even if they did, the amount of stigma that exists in our community about people who use substances, they wouldn't get the room anyway.
We know a few people who, in the times that this space, the ICH, has been open, have been very intentional. They haven't left the property. They don't want to go anywhere. And I think that can be misconstrued as they love to, they want to be here because there's dope and they want to be around substances. I think it's really that they feel chronically unwelcome everywhere else in the community. They don't feel safe walking downtown, because if they're not doing well and they have a vocal outburst or something, someone's just gonna call the police on them. Or if they go into a grocery store or a retail store, someone's gonna assume that they're stealing and call the police on them. The idea that someone would not be safe coming here because of the people who we work with, who in my experience are extremely gentle and kind and not super problematic people. And more often they're hurt by their own community or police or people that are really supposed to be keeping everyone safe. And as much as I want to have really good relationships with community partners, I've described working here as feeling a little bit we're on an island, and that nobody wants to come to the island to help or to take anyone away, and we're just a floating rock that has to do everything ourselves.
It's hard to look at people using substances. It's hard to look at people who are unhoused because it makes you feel guilty about yourself. As I was saying before, I feel guilty going home to my safe, warm bed with my child when I know that some people don't have that luxury. And even like, as a person who used substances, my first time going to the ICH, my very first shift, I remember I parked in the parking lot, and I remember walking in, and I was like given my papers so that I could sign. And I remember my hands were shaking so bad because I have never seen substance use that open. And like, I had been around people, like I had used the same substances, I had done the same things. It was wild for me to see this in like such an open environment. So I was really thrown off at first. So I understand how like the general population would feel about that. But it's when you get a little bit closer and you listen and you learn, that is the safest place for people to be using. To be using openly around other people where they can be helped if they need it.
People that I love pass away and go missing and let me in on their hurt too. So they'll tell me that they feel helpless and that they feel stuck. They'll try to like hurt themselves because they just deal with like unimaginable pain. I absolutely feel obligated to sit with them through it. I think that's like mostly what my job is to be with them when things are like impossibly challenging and just show up for them.
I just hope someday we get to live in a world where everybody gets to feel loved and safe and supported. And I know that that's a really far way away. Yeah, I don't know.
I think initially when all this started to happen, we were referring to it as an opiate overdose epidemic, and it's more like an opiate overdose catastrophe at this point. The drug supply has never been so toxic in the history of illicit substance use, and people are languishing and dying at rates that we've never ever seen before. And I've always believed that how the most vulnerable people are doing in our community is a reflection of how we're doing as a community, and we're doing a shit job. A real shit job. There's more people chronically homeless. There's more people suffering with chronic substance use than ever before. I think that's a really telling tale that we're just not listening to.
Yeah, I remember we used to do a lot of presentations early in the needle exchange days because, we'd be handing out syringes to people. And at first people thought, oh, you're encouraging drug use. You're just making it worse. People need treatment. And I remember this would have been 1990, 1991, doing public presentations where we talked about the myths of addiction. And it's odd to me we're still having to communicate the same teachings.
I've been doing this work a long time now. Like, I've been doing this work 17 years. I've been working for Street Health for almost 15 years. And I never expected my career to take the turn that it has. I never expected myself to be doing CPR on people in the woods that weren't going to make it. I never thought that people were going to turn their backs on people the way they have in a time where they need support more than ever before.
Whenever there's a widespread kind of health concern, if you look at, say, cancer and how prevalent cancer is, we now have decades of serious investment in research, preclinical research, clinical research, knowledge translation, treatment, integrative supports for people. we really haven't evolved the same ecosystem around addiction and mental health. If we had any other health condition that we looked at and you'd see the tens of thousands of people being judged or discarded, I think most people would be shocked if we considered doing that to diabetics or people with cancer. But there's something about addiction, we allow it tacitly because of this judgment that we have on people, this stigma that there's something wrong. And in many, many ways, this is simply society being unable to look in its own mirror, to look at the unbelievable human cost of just power, privilege. And because of the level of judgment and misunderstanding around both addiction and mental health, people are simply on their own in a way that is, I don't think we'd tolerate with many other health conditions. So.
It's just the blatant stigma and discrimination, particularly towards people who use substances. We have this concept in society that if you use drugs, it's of your choice and you're a moral failure because of it. If you die because of your substance use, well, that was your choice because you chose to use those illicit, dangerous substances. The way we have approached poverty and substance use in North America in particular has always been this stigmatizing, demonizing, criminalizing view of these individuals, and it hasn't worked. But because of our own personal biases and what we've been told our whole lives about people that use substances, we've actually put nothing into this opioid catastrophe response whatsoever.
When I look back to when the Needle Exchange started, we generally worked with people who were residential school survivors and training school survivors. And people forget in Canada and in Ontario, we had training schools. These were youth jails with rampant abuse that went on through the 1980s at least, including ones not far from here. So a lot of the people that we worked with early on were like the collateral damage of these horrible public institutions that really caused a lot of harm. And then they went on to have lives in which you're coping with significant trauma and loss. And drugs are functional in the sense that they help people cope. We need to give credit where credit is due, to the sense that people repeat a behavior because it works. And it works because we're offsetting massive amounts of trauma, uncertainty, difficulty, unpredictability. And drug use can, in a medicinal kind of way, allow people to cope, allow people to function. People who are street involved, amphetamines allow for a higher level of vigilance over a long period of time where you have to be alert because you're not safe. So once we understand the kind of functional side of drug use, the question then becomes, how do you simply minimize the risks and optimize the benefits? And I think that's where medicine in general, psychology, psychiatry, we've really failed people at risk. People who have vulnerabilities in any other way, that it's a really quick decline now into real struggle and into real desperation. And when you look at the death rates related to overdose or drug toxicity, it's simply continuing to grow in a way that you really have to wonder, is it just a simple lack of will?
The reality is these policies around drug use and the people that use drugs are the reason that we're in the position that we're in the first place. It is privileged individuals that have no experience with chronic homelessness, with living with a substance use disorder, that are making these policies and dictating their lives. And in turn, because we did not include people with lived experience who really are the experts in it, who really should be writing the policies around it, we are now entrenched in this catastrophe that is only getting worse every single year. Every single year since this has started, we are surpassing the deaths from the year before, right? And really, this is failed drug policies written by people that had no business writing them in the first place.
The war on drugs is simply part of it, but poverty, the lack of any interest in really providing people with stable housing and investing in real homelessness solutions. We've known these problems for decades, but there's been such a clear lack of political will among the higher levels of leadership that at some point the dam has burst. And so it's only a matter of time for me between you have the level of social chaos is going to get worse unless we have alternative models of understanding this. So then you come back to the root. How are we perceiving these problems? Why are we judging people? Why are we saying they're different from us? Everybody has the same needs. Most people gravitate towards substance use at some point in their life because of a need or just a pattern they've fallen into. So how we can't extend compassion or understanding to people is beyond me. I think those of us who struggle with substances, there's already a sense of guilt and shame. The social construction of addiction is so off of what it should be if you look at it, understanding it scientifically or understanding it clinically or medically. We see it as a weakness and a failure. Judging people has always been a recipe for social disconnection, but it also creates just this massive barrier between people.
For whatever reason in society, we've decided to deem this the trauma Olympics, and who, you know, I suffered the same stuff, and I didn't use drugs, and I didn't do that. Not looking at the bigger picture of the supports that maybe you had around you, the stability that you had in your life, whether you come from generational trauma or generational poverty, they're not willing to look at the bigger picture. And what the bigger picture actually is that if you have had some sort of adverse childhood experience, you have experienced some type of significant trauma in your life, and nobody was there to intervene in regards to how you were going to cope and how you were going to be supported and how you were going to build resiliency to get past this, you have almost a 1,200% likelihood of injecting substances. You have almost a 900% chance of being chronically homeless. What choice do people really have? And that's the biggest problem, is that we've put this emphasis on choice. There's no choice in the matter. Nobody's having fun. What we've actually done is isolated people further. We've banished them to an island and said, if you survive, great. If you don't, you don't, right? I don't want to leave this world bitter and angry. But the way people treat the most vulnerable, it's actually completely changed my views on the world and people. A lot of my people are referred to as monkeys from the zoo. We work in a place called the Integrated Care Hub. People call it the Integrated Crime Hub, the crackhead campground. People are constantly saying, let them take each other out, let them overdose and die. That's their doing. They refer to them as shit rats and scrouts. They've told people that they're gonna burn their tents down and they don't care if they're in them. It's really shameful behavior, and I could only imagine if some of the people that say those things, if their child ended up experiencing the things that some of my people experience, I would rally around their child and I would support them and I would love them. And I would try my best to keep them alive. And I hope that people don't have to experience those types of things to change their views on it. But these days, that seems to be the only way it's impacting people in regards to change of thought processes. Like, you know, something negative or some negative experiences had to come in their life, or they've lost somebody that they cared about, and then they start to take an understanding of it. That's not the way it should be. It's not the way it should be.
When Devin was little, I didn't think he's going to grow up to have a substance use issue or problem. I didn't foresee him developing mental health issues. I didn't foresee him being dismissed at 7 years old, or me being dismissed by the very people that we sought help for. So that kind of set the tone for Devin, and he grew up without the help that he needed. That changed everything.
The roots of addiction, it's a question I feel that we get a lot in terms of working with people who use substances. And I'll always remember reading a quote by Gabor Mate that was really talking about how society sees like the substance use itself as the problem, while for people who use substances, that's often their solution to problems. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that's how we need to start understanding addiction, is understanding not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
Trauma is a huge reason. It's not because, oh, hey, I'm just gonna try this, and people don't do that. Physical pain, trauma, childhood adversity, all of that stuff. And I think that when you have trauma, then that draws out mental unwellness. And even people that don't, it's just trauma is just a horrible thing. It manifests itself in so many different ways.
I think we need to just take a big step back and start having conversations with people who are using substances and understanding that piece, like what happened, how can we support, and then looking at modalities of healing that actually tackle the root cause, and that's not fueled by war on drug monger, fear, and stigma. There's a bigger picture, and we're often only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more that we need to open our hearts and understand through a compassionate lens what's really going on with people who are using substances.
We have a broken system where, people who use substances or unhoused people are treated very differently than, neurotypical people. And I'm talking about the medical and the mental health community too. The long wait times, everything. It's just, it's horrible. And so, what other avenue do they have? And, when you're unwell, when you're traumatized, the most important thing to you is to be able to have some kind of respite from it. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, or it would be to the outer community. It's their survival mechanism, because they don't want to die. They just want to feel better. They want that, 20 minutes of peace, of escape from their reality. And whether you're, it's 20 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, then you're going to do it. It's Van Gogh. I don't know whether this story is true. There's some question as to whether it is or not. But, Van Gogh was he was incredibly depressed. He major depressive disorder. And if you see in his paintings, he used yellow all the time. And it was because to him it was a really happy color. So he used to ingest it because he figured that if he could paint the insides of his organs yellow, then he would be happy. And that's a really good way of explaining that if you're so traumatized, if you're so unhappy and nothing else is working, then people absolutely are willing to risk their lives in order to just get, that few moments, an hour, day, whatever, of respite from the pain. And it makes perfect sense to me. The fact that substance use is such a, no-no. To me, we're all groomed for addiction. It's just that we use different vehicles. I'm traumatized, and I have an eating disorder. So that's one thing. There's gambling, there's sex addiction, there's all sorts of things. And it's all the same. It's all a way of us being able to escape or to find some kind of control over our situation. For me, it was definitely control over something. I couldn't control anything else in my life. I was too young and couldn't get away, and nobody was going to come and, save me. So I starved myself, and it felt powerful. So there it is. It's just the way it is.
I think there's kind of like a stereotype and a misconception about like who are harm reduction workers, right? Like what do we actually do? And I think most people understand harm reduction as risk reduction, and that is kind of what comes to people's minds when we are thinking about harm reduction. It's those risk reduction activities. Most people would always think needle and syringe programs as harm reduction, and certainly it's reducing harm. But how we understand that is those are risk reduction services implemented in communities to not only combat the drug poisoning crisis, not only decrease stigma for a community of people that are nervous to walk through doors and access the medical supplies needed, but if that is what we are deeming harm reduction, we're not doing justice to the people that harm reduction is there to support, to include, to empower, to build up, and to honor the shoulders of those we stand on to do this work.
Harm reduction is mutual aid. It's also, humanizing. When we talk about meeting somebody where they're at, really for me, and I think for anybody who's a frontline worker, it means that not trying to change them, accepting them for who they are and where they're at in this moment, and not sort of trying to plan a trajectory, not putting your own wants and needs or whatever as a parent or frontline worker on them. Just accept them for who they are and what they are, where they're at with their substance use, and no pressure. And really for me, it's just compassion. It's free. Compassion and empathy is free, and support is free. So why wouldn't a person want to give that? It takes no time at all. Looking somebody in the eye, saying hi to them, asking them how their day's going, sitting with them, and just helping them to feel like they're seen and heard. That's a huge part too.
Because the biggest theme is often stigma, and that is something we can tackle. That is something we can do without any additional resources, without funding. We can all start to do better. We can all start to unpack our unconscious biases. We can all start to open our hearts and our minds up to people who use substances and people with lived and living expertise to enrich our lives. Because I have likely learned more. My life has likely been enriched far more by the people that we serve than I'll ever do for them. This is mutually beneficial as a society to take care of each other and to show up and stand in solidarity with people. I would love in 5 years, 10 years to look back and actually be like, whoa, like why was that the case? Like, why did people talk about harm reduction in that way? Because we will be so far on the other side of it. And you won't need an island of misfit toys. You won't need the radical group of people doing that work. We will all be doing that work by recognizing our own privileges and understanding truly where things are at and where these movements come from, and standing in solidarity once and for all. It's wouldn't that be a beautiful, beautiful world? But that's harm reduction to me. It's life-saving. It's a movement. It's something that needs to always be honored. That evolves, but that's existed for a long time.
My name is Claudia McNulty. I'm the Community Support Program Facilitator, but when I talk to people about my job, I often just say that I'm a harm reduction worker, because I think my my title is like underpinned by the fact that I come from like a harm reduction background and will always be doing harm reduction work.
My name's Amanda Rogers. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm employed at Trellis HIV and Community Care as the manager of harm reduction services.
My name's Justin McIsaac, and I run the Safe Consumption site at the Integrated Care Hub.
My name's Haley Carpenter, and right now I'm the Youth Peer Support Program Coordinator at Resolve. But previous to that, I was a harm reduction outreach worker at the ICH.
I'm Susan Dukars. I'm a overdose prevention support worker. I work at the Integrated Care Hub at the overdose prevention site.
My name is Ron Shore. I'm a research scientist and psilocybin clinical trial therapist, Department of Psychiatry, Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario.
I didn't sign up for work to be easy, and I don't think when you're working with marginalized groups of people, when you're seeing the inequities, when you're seeing the suffering, when you're seeing the like systemic oppression that just continues to exist, even though we've been talking about the same thing for so long, right? So I'm never expecting work to be easy.
My sole purpose and my sole job is to provide respite for people in regards to the war on drugs. We are in the most trying and most complex time ever, and grief is one of my biggest challenges in the sense that I take that home, I take that everywhere with me, and then I share it with people that are carrying the same amount of grief. And we're not even talking about just necessarily grief of the loss of our people that we serve. We're talking about losing children and fathers and partners personally in our lives. This has impacted every facet of what we do, but also is the reason why we're so perfect for the job. At the same time too, the resilience factor that we have built up through our grief and through our struggles and through our advocacy makes us who we are at the same time too.
There's perhaps a generalization which may have some merit, which is people feel unsupported by the institutions or decision makers that are behind the scenes. I think that's a fair assumption. I think that was an ongoing challenge for us in the early days. It was a real uphill battle to kind of convince, a medical officer of health that this was important, to convince directors of hospitals that it was important to kind of introduce some programming. But I think most of us really struggle in finding that we have broader levels of support for the work we do and feeling that we're always up against a power system. So I think what that means is we take great solace in each other.
Yeah, I felt supported. Again, not by a ton of like external sources, but I personally feel like a lot of support lives here, that the community that we've created in this space supports each other and is patient and kind and compassionate with each other for the most part, like even on hard days.
I'm very lucky that I am confident in who I am and as a person, and there is nothing that is abnormal or wrong about caring for another human being and intervening when they need it most. You're never gonna rattle me in regards to that. You're never, ever, ever gonna rattle me. And the support that I have had has come from my coworkers and the people that I serve that are entrenched in it with me, right? That are side by side with me when we're literally breathing for somebody, because they're really the first responders. They've been doing this in the community far long before safe consumption sites existed and different types of programs, low barrier programs and stuff like that. They have been in the trenches for years. They have been drafted into a war that was not of their choice, of their doing. And they've had no respite from it whatsoever, none. I really wish that I lived in a community that would rally around us and see that what we do is so valuable, right? Not only for that individual, but for us as a community. On average, this building on a monthly basis saves the healthcare system hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? I don't even care. If you can't even buy into it in regards to like your heartstrings, like look at the financial aspect of it, please. It cost me $70 to respond to an overdose total in this site. It costs almost $1,500 to start a triage file alone at the hospital, right? So like, if you can't buy into it that way, look at it from the dollars and cents aspect, because our healthcare system is diminishing and fractured and falling apart by the day, and you actually need us. You need us far more than you think. We're running ER diversion on a continuous basis. I don't think people understand either how much it costs when somebody dies in the community as well too.
I worry for the health of harm reduction workers. I think what we ask people to do in this field far exceeds A, what we're paying them, and B, what is reasonable as an expectation.
I feel like working on the front lines of the drug poisoning crisis, we have become the first responders in the war on drugs, the war on people who use drugs, and of course, more particularly, the drug poisoning crisis. So we are used to showing up. We are used to being aware of everything that's going on because we become the first responders. And I think we don't talk about it very much, a notion of anticipatory grief. It feels, I guess, every day when I wake up, it almost feels like you're waiting. It feels like there's a waiting, right? There's this anticipation of what will be, who won't be there.
I remember a lot of days not being able to sleep. There are times where I've had to restrict youth because they had food in their rooms. And I've had to, look a 16-year-old in the face and say, no, I'm sorry, you can't have a bed tonight. And, there's just a lot of moral injury in this line of work. There's a lot of compassion fatigue. It's exhausting and it makes you feel guilty. Working with people all day who survive with the bare minimum and they're resourceful and they have to be so clever with everything that they do. But when I go home to my house at night, I think about the fact that these people who I care about are sleeping in the woods, and not all of them are going to be warm. Most of them are not going to be warm. Most of them won't have a bed to sleep in. So there's a lot of guilt.
There are certain people that may have had a particularly bad day, and I think, holy hell, I hope they're going to be okay. And honestly, some of them, all of them, I just want to scoop up and bring home. I want them to have a shower when they want to have a shower. I want to be able to feed them. I want to be able to have them sit on my couch and watch a movie with me. I want, for me as a mother, I want to give them that respite, and that's the hardest thing is going home and not knowing whether they're going to be okay.
I guess I assume that people will say, well, why don't you set some boundaries and not overwork yourself or not put all of yourself into this job? And I'm not open to feedback on it because I think that it needs to be done, and I love it here, and I don't plan on not doing this work. And it's just hard to talk about with people who aren't here and understanding it. So my supports are here. This is my family here.
When you go home at night and the day's been hard, you're wondering how you're even going to show up tomorrow, and you turn on the TV or you go on social media and you actually see people wishing that the people you provide support and care for. People wish that they didn't exist, right? Or you go home and you see a news article potentially about new legislation, new bylaws that are going to disproportionately impact the people we're serving and supporting. That's almost like equally, if not more, damaging, or it takes a lot of healing to come back from that. I think different from like the loss and losing people. It's the societal norm that like it's okay to like hate people who use drugs, and it's okay to pass laws, bylaws, legislation that are discriminating against a population of people. So
when I get home from work, when we close our doors every day, I pray that the people that I love and serve every day, that I will see them again tomorrow. And when I wake up in the morning, it's the exact same thought process. I hope everybody was okay overnight. I hope that I get to see this person when I show up, because I know they weren't doing well. Because of like my own trauma, like associated to this work, I play scenarios and missed opportunities in my head regularly. And I play out how I'm gonna respond to somebody that's blue and not breathing and close to death. And then I have to pump myself up for it, right? And say, you know, you got this, Justine. People are relying on you. And you need to show up for them, because people don't show up for them, right? So even on days that I just like don't want to be here, and I feel sick, and I feel like I don't have the capability to provide adequate care, I show up because nobody else has showed up for people. And it's my responsibility and it's my job, you know, and I owe it to them. So that's what I think of. Yeah. No, it's okay. I can cry and go through anything.
I feel very seen here. And I think this place has offered a lot of people who have like imposter syndrome like a very cool place to be like exactly themselves and to feel like they're still like really appreciated. It's like, it's the best place. It's so complicated that like so much bad stuff happens and it's still like so magical. It's really something.
If I could do it all over again, there are definitely things I would do differently. But, you know, they say hindsight is 20/20. So there's, you know, I have Amor Fati tattooed on my arm for a reason, which is love of fate. It's acceptance of everything that kind of befalls you in a way. And not that it takes away free will, it's more like to accept everything allows you to live more fully.
Like there's times that I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna probably die by the time I'm 50. Because I've absorbed so much. But if I changed anything, I wouldn't be the person that I am. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have these amazing people shape and shift my life. I just wish more people were on board with me, you know? Yeah. But I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change anything about it. I'm here for a reason.
I assume that I will always look back on this time in my life, and it's gonna be really hard to match in terms of the people that I've met here and found here and what we've accomplished and the relationships that have been formed here. I think that I'll always look back and think that like this was the really good time, even in like all of the really challenging stuff that goes on. And it's just the people here, really, like are very, very special.
I wouldn't trade it for the world if it meant that I didn't get to meet the people I've met, care for the people I've met, learnt, shared space, shared meals. You know, sometimes heartbreaking the work can be. It's never actually the people that we're there and designed to serve that like make the work challenging. I don't think there's ever been a day that I've wanted to not do the work because of the community or the population of people that we're there to support.
The work that I do is really hard, and it takes a lot of me emotionally, it takes a lot from me mentally, but I have grown so much as a person because of the things that I've learned in this field and the people that I've met. I've gained such an understanding that I don't think I would have ever had unless I spent the amount of time that I did around people who live in the encampment. I think I've met so many amazing people, and they've taught me so much and had me grow to be the person that I am now. I absolutely wouldn't change any of that.
I need the community to back us up. I need that more than ever. I need police services to back us up in many capacity. I wish my city council would actually listen to me. I wish that the community was nicer. Like, just stop and take the time to think about how this is going to impact us as a community and as individuals long term, you know? Slow it down.
One of the things we need the most right now is not just decrim, but safe supply. We need those together and done in the right way, because a lot of people talk about safe supply for the people that use drugs every day, but you know, the wider community who use substances, you know, on the weekend or recreationally, they're even more at risk.
The impact of judgment and stigma on people is profound. I think those of us who struggle with substances, there's already a sense of guilt and shame. The first thing we can do if we want to do a better job working on substance use issues is get our facts straight and quit judging people.
A willingness from the community to have open, honest, and like transparent conversations about the real impact the drug poisoning crisis is having on a community, but also on the care providers tackling the drug poisoning crisis.
The best advice that I ever received, which was from Roy Johnson, he said at the time, just shut up and drink coffee and smoke cigarettes with people, which was horrible health advice, but really good health planning advice, because my very first orientation then was to listen and learn. The answers are there. What people need is there. It's simply having, and not just hearing, but listening, and then having the moral fortitude to act on it.
If there were low barrier options for youth in Kingston, there isn't a single low barrier housing option for kids in Kingston. There's nowhere for them to go. There's one shelter that they can access, where at the time that I worked at, it had 16 beds. So we had room for 16 youth to be homeless in Kingston, and that was it. And, you know, once we're full, and you have no other option that you can go to.
We don't have any adequate housing for people that are actively still using substances. And the way we're housing people now, unfortunately, they're dying in their homes. It's virtually impossible to transitional people who have been chronically homeless for 10, 15 years from communal living to an apartment where there's no supports and no transition, nobody checking on them, nobody ensuring that they're as safe as possible while they still use a toxic illicit supply.
I think that everyone who works here would have an easier time if we saw more success, if we saw people kind of move through the system like they're supposed to. If people came and stayed in the shelter for a couple weeks when something hadn't gone right in their lives, but then, did everything they were supposed to, and they would get a housing worker and they'd get matched in a place, and the place was like safe and clean, and then they had enough supports available to them to be successful in that place. I think that would help a lot. It would help people to not think that we're kind of like on a hamster wheel and not really making progress, because what we have seen is some people who have been here for 3 years and can't move forward.
Of course it's all worth it. Of course it's all worth it. I walk down the street and I'll see people who I know would not be alive. I see people have children. I see people have grandchildren, and they would 100% guaranteed would not have been alive.
I remember this one shift. It was an overnight shift. And I remember sitting with this one client who he's passed since. But I remember sitting with him for probably 4 hours, cleaning all these sores on his hand and wrapping him up and, treating these wounds for him. And, the amount of gratitude that he expressed to me and the amount that I learned about this person during that time, and, the stories that he told me and the things that he told me about his childhood. And he even told me about his mother who had passed, and he was crying. And I love that I was able to share that moment with him and help him and learn about him. So yeah, I think even the things that I don't love doing, they still bring me a lot of joy, because I love to make people feel loved.
Looking back, it's worth it 1,000 times over. I think as much as sometimes you get, a mouthful and you bite off way more than you can chew, as many hard times as you have, I wouldn't change it for the world.
It's absolutely 100% worth it. Absolutely. Because I know that they're loved, and they know that they're loved. I get as much from this job as they do. It's reciprocal. And earning their trust is probably the best feeling in the world. And it means that I get to continue what I was doing with my son, but on a much larger scale. And I think I was meant to do this my whole life. Yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's worth it when somebody goes from virtually dead to alive and hugging me and saying, thank you. I love you. I love you too, buddy. I'm super glad you were here. I love people that use substances. I love, love, love people that use substances. They're the most brilliant, resourceful individuals that I've ever met in my life. And I am so, so grateful to all of you and how you've enriched and changed my life and gave me my own value, meaning, and purpose in this world. I love you, love you, love you so much.